afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you haven't all exhausted your willpower, and I hope you still have a Lindt chocolate in your hands. I'm going to have to ask you to exert your willpower just a few more minutes before we get to the mindful eating of this chocolate. A couple of years ago, I was in a very privileged position of being on the organizing committee of a visit by the Dalai Lama to Perth. My teacher was the state manager for that particular visit. His name is Les Shea. And he said, David, would you mind being on the committee? And of course, it was a huge privilege, so I said yes. And Les and I got to talk very early on in the piece, and we were talking about, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get as many people in Perth as possible to come and listen to the Dalai Lama? And so we investigated options, and we discovered that the Burswood Dome was the largest indoor venue in Perth at that time. It held 18,000 people. We could hire it for a day and have 2 sessions, and thereby 36,000 people could come to listen to His Holiness. The big challenge was we really wanted to make it free of charge, so that anybody who really wanted to could listen to the Dalai Lama without any thought about expense. And the trick, we thought, was why don't we have a corporate fundraising lunch at which His Holiness will address, and we'll get the top end of town to pay for everyone else. And this is during the good old years before the GFC, when the streets of Perth were awash with mining cash. So this is a great idea, we thought. And so we decided we needed to come up with this title of a subject that the Dalai Lama would feel comfortable talking about, and that also could be written off against as many different expense accounts as possible. So there was a certain fine balance to be found here. And we eventually came up with what we thought was a real killer of a title. And it ran past Dharamsala. They were happy. We were happy. Out went the invitations, and within a couple of weeks, the entire Grand Ballroom of the Hyatt was sold out, 500 seats for $750 each. And that underwrote the entire day that he was in Perth, which is great. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. And then the great day arrived, and His Holiness came to Perth, and he was ushered into the ballroom of the Hyatt. And I'm not sure whether any of you have ever been in the same room as the Dalai Lama. I suspect a great many of you have. But you know that awed hush that descends when he comes into the room. It's like it sends the hairs up my spine just remembering it. It's an amazing experience. And anyway, the Dalai Lama was ushered to the front, and all the lights were brought down, and it was just him and his translator. And there were these big plasma screens all around the Grand Ballroom of the Hyatt, so we could all see very closely every expression on his face. The Dalai Lama turns to his translator and said, "Can you remind me of the title of today's speech?" Les and I exchanged an anxious glance. And certainly, Your Holiness, turns over the page. It's the heart of leadership and corporate well-being. The Dalai Lama looks very, very kind of somber at this, very, concentrating for a few moments. He says, "No, I don't know anything about that." 500 people, $750 a head, had come to listen to somebody claim they didn't know anything about the subject. But the Dalai Lama then spoke for 20 minutes on loving kindness, and he got a standing ovation. And so I learned a very, very important lesson from the Dalai Lama that day about public speaking. And that lesson is simply this: content is secondary. Long after people have forgotten every last word that you've ever told them, they will still remember the way that you made them feel. And certainly His Holiness remembers the way that I can still remember, and I'm sure everyone did exactly how they felt when he was there in the room with them. This is precisely why I'm leaning very heavily on the good services of Lindor chocolate manufacturers, because I'm hoping that you will all leave today's presentation with the feeling of exquisite deliciousness. So what I'd like you to do now, the moment has come, drum roll, all of that, but don't just bolt it down. I'd like you, please, we're going to ritualistically eat these chocolates. I'd like you, please, to first of all just unpeel the chocolate and put it in the palm of your hand. And I'd like you, please, just to contemplate for a moment how this chocolate connects you to the whole of the world. I'm talking very literally here. There is somebody somewhere in Southeast Asia planted some sugarcane and harvested the sugarcane, and the sugarcane was turned into sugar, which was sent to the chocolate manufacturers in Europe. And that is now in your chocolate, that sugar from Southeast Asia. And somebody similarly in West Africa, in the cocoa plantations, picked those little beans, little brown bitter beans, that eventually get turned into chocolate. And they put them in Hessian sacks, put them in lorries down to the ports off to Europe, That's now in your chocolate. This chocolate now connects you to Africa. High on a hill, there's a lonely goatherd. No, high on a hill somewhere in Austria or Germany, there's a cow and a whole lot of cattle munching happily, minding their own business, eating their grass, and they were milked, and their milk was turned into your chocolate. So you are connected to Europe, and specifically to European cattle, a European cow, through this chocolate. You're also connected, as anybody who knows about shipping will know, most of the ships in this world are registered in Panama. And so you're connected to South America, because if it wasn't for a Panamanian registered ship, none of this would have happened at all. So this chocolate connects you to a man in a white hat somewhere in Panama. And similarly, the chocolate could never have happened. Lindor is now a global company without the benefits of global finance. So this chocolate connects you to the bankers of New York and London. And last but by no means least, there's the agent in Sydney who imports these chocolates. There's the people who organize the conference today who very kindly agreed to provide you with them. And so this chocolate connects you to Australia as well. There's a world in this little chocolate. It's quite an amazing thing when you think about it. In fact, every moment of our lives we're interconnected with the whole world in the most amazing ways that we rarely consider. Anyway, that's so much for the cognitive or the intellectual aspects of this chocolate. Why don't we indulge now? And first of all, I want you to try and have the attitude of a curious botanist. That's often the way we're encouraged to think when we meditate or practice mindfulness. Try and think of this chocolate as a mysterious thing, and today, for the first time, you're going to notice something about a Lindt chocolate that you have never noticed before. Something maybe about the appearance of it, maybe the weight of it, maybe even the smell of it, maybe the texture of the surface. See whether you can really engage totally. Now, giving yourself permission to think about nothing except for chocolate. And for the next 1 minute, I'd like you please to, however you like to enjoy it, whether it's one bite or two, enjoy your Lindt chocolate. And if any other thought pops into your head, dismiss it immediately and return to your sense doors, the taste, the quality, the texture of eating Lindt chocolate. I personally would like to spend a lot more time enjoying that mastication, but unfortunately, all good things come to an end. Why mindfulness is better than chocolate? When I mention the title of this new book to various people, the reaction has always been the same. People generally have a bit of a chuckle, and then they say, but it's not true, is it? Mindfulness is not better than chocolate. Actually, there was a fascinating study that was done of 2,000 people who had smartphones in the US. The study was not done very long ago. And some really interesting results came out of it, because people were sent 3 questions at different times of the day. One question is, what are you doing? The second question is, what are you thinking? And the third question is, how happy are you? And what it showed is that 47% of the time, people are not thinking about what they're doing. They're thinking about something else. So about half the time, we're not being mindful. We're thinking about something else. What's something else? The something else probably is our narrative chatter. So we're not tuned into our direct senses, our smell, sight, touch, etc. We're busy thinking about something, probably something that happened in the past or the future, a fantasy, a speculation, whatever it might be, but we're not actually in the here and now. So half the time, we're somewhere else. That figure may not surprise you, but the figure that did surprise me is that there's a direct correlation between mindfulness and self-reported levels of happiness. So when we are actually engaged in whatever it is we're doing, we're far more likely to be happy than when we're thinking about something other than what we're doing, irrespective of what we're doing. And in fact, the interesting thing was, it said it didn't seem to matter in this study, the conclusion was, it didn't seem to matter what you were doing, you were just as equally likely to have a wandering mind. Okay? That's fascinating. So you could be sitting there eating a piece of Lindt chocolate, as you just have, or you could be washing the dishes, and you're just as likely to have a wandering mind. And so that is why mindfulness will always trump chocolate as a source of happiness, because when you're mindful, by definition, you have a far likelier chance of being happy than when you're doing any other activity. Interestingly enough, there's only one activity in which humans report very high levels of mindfulness. You've all guessed it, sex. Only 10% of people reported having wandering minds during sex, which to me begs the question, what were they thinking about? I think we need a lot more research on that. And in fact, could grocery list cliche be true? When I was, I go to the gym. I'm a reluctant gym goer, regular but reluctant. And I came back from the gym once, having thought of this title of a book, and I said to my wife, actually, I've had a better idea. I think it should be Why Mindfulness is Better Than Sex. And she looked up from her laptop. She's doing some work. She said, I thought you said that most of your readers are middle-aged women. And I said, they are. She said, stick to the chocolate. But you might ask, does the world really need yet another book on mindfulness? As you know, mindfulness has become really mainstream in recent years. There's, large corporations, Google, Apple, and Facebook, etc., have their big wisdom conference every year at Palo Alto. There are big corporations, banks, accounting firms, etc., encourage their mindfulness among their employees. Most universities now have mindful leadership as part of their business schools. There are contemplative neuroscience faculties appearing throughout the world. Mindfulness really has become big. I think there are something like 30 studies done on mindfulness back in 2001 and over 300 done by 2011. So it's like this growing momentum that's happening. So it's fascinating and very, very exciting in many ways. But you have to ask, does the world really need another book on mindfulness? Because along with all these studies, of course, are the books. And I'll tell you the reason why I actually wrote this particular book. I was doing a seminar at a business school quite recently, and I was asked by one of the people there, tell me, David, I've just been up in Thailand, and there are all these monks, and they just hang around waiting for their lunch, because they get fed very well by the local community at lunchtime. And then they toddle off to their monastery and sleep overnight, and they come out again and get more food the next day. They appear to have lives that are completely free of stress. Why on earth do they meditate? And judging from the nodding and smiling that was going around in the room, it seemed quite clear that a lot of other people agreed with them. Meantime, I was just thinking, what a tragically diminished idea of mindfulness this person has. I mean, great that he knows that it's good for stress management. I mean, that's fantastic. But the reality is that that is not a reason why Buddhist monks meditate or why Buddhists meditate. It's not an important reason, certainly not the main reason. It's a bit like saying to somebody, why bother going online and have an internet account if you're not on Facebook? Facebook may be one reason why you're on the internet, but it's, by no means the most important. The real reason that Buddhists meditate, and the real reason that meditation was developed all those thousands of years ago, is because it's the only way that we can actually have direct access to the nature of our own mind. And I thought that it's really important that we try and correct this. So in this book, Why Mindfulness is Better Than Chocolate, I have summarized at the beginning of the book a lot of the clinical studies and research that show the many, many benefits of mindfulness. The well-known ones to do with stress management, helping with recurring depression, anxiety. There are so many, and they're so powerful, and they're very good reasons to meditate. I've also gone on to talk about the use of mindfulness in relation to cognitive behavior training, because more and more it's been used in conjunction with CBT, because it's all very well telling people to manage their own mind stream and to remove negative mental patterns and replace them with more positive ones. But unless you're actually aware of what's going on, you don't have the capacity to manage it. So that's another reason why mindfulness is so important. But the main reason, the real reason why I really wanted to get this book out is to help encourage people to discover for themselves the nature of their own minds directly and non-conceptually. What do I mean by non-conceptually? Just to give you an illustration, a couple of years ago, I was watching this documentary, showed a whole lot of plantation workers in West Africa picking those little cocoa beans, and they all knew what chocolate was. They had a lot of ideas about chocolate, how it came in chocolate bars, and it was brown, and when you bit into it, went soft and it melted, came in a variety of flavors. None of them had actually ever eaten chocolate. And the manufacturers, the makers of this documentary, brought along chocolate with them, and they gave the chocolate bars out to these guys, and they filmed them. And at that moment, they had their very first bite of chocolate, and you can just imagine the faces. It was amazing to watch. And so at that moment, their understanding of chocolate had moved from an intellectual, conceptual one to a direct and first-hand understanding of chocolate. And that is precisely what happens when we start to meditate. We have an opportunity to, for ourselves, directly and non-conceptually, understand the nature of our own mind. Trying to get my own glasses here. What I would like to do is just read you, very briefly, a few paragraphs at the front of my book where I explain this notion that through meditation we can actually directly experience mind for ourselves. And then we come to mind itself, what it is not. I'll guide you through the practical steps by which you can experience your own mind for yourself, not as a concept or intellectual idea, but directly and firsthand. You'll be empowered to experience the nature of your own consciousness, and if you're anything like most people who've never tried this before, you'll find in those first glimpses of the pure nature of your own mind an extraordinary truth. You'll see for yourself how your mind is, quite literally, infinite, how it has no beginning and no end, how far from being some existential void, it's imbued with the most profound, happiness-giving qualities. You'll experience the paradox that even though you set out to explore your mind, the result is as much a feeling as it is a perception. It's an experience beyond concept, and for which words are therefore wholly inadequate, but that may be hinted at using terms such as oceanic tranquility and radiant love. Even the briefest encounter with the state is life-changing, because when we can free ourselves from the agitation or dullness that pervades our minds and encounter our own true natures, if only momentarily, we can never go back to believing ourselves to be nothing more than a bag of bones. We have experienced a dimension of being that transcends all our usual ideas of self. We have come home. And it's my heartfelt wish that by writing this book, as many people as possible can experience for themselves the true nature of their own minds and find that for all of us, the reality is that the nature of our primordial mind is nothing other than pure great love and pure great compassion. Thank you.